Welcome to lesson 8. In this lesson we are going to discuss the surface parameter. So let's grab a forest pack. Let's make sure that we're on generate. Click on this plane right over there, say yes, and the same process, what we can do is going to go underneath the geometry rollout, plus button, custom object, teapot, say yes, and again underneath display, let's go underneath mesh so we can actually see the scattered item. And if you don't see anything, just remember underneath distribution, let's just scroll that down slowly until we see some scattered objects. So we're going to discuss the surface rollout, which is this one over here, and just remember the names that appear here are all of your scattered surfaces. It's not going to be anything that is spline related. This is reserved just for your 3D objects. Also important is that you cannot add a group to your scattered surface area. It has to be multiple objects, or of course one object, just everything attached to one another, which we'll cover in a moment. So the first button we have is the plus button. If I click on the plus and simply click on any surface that I want, you can see that it will automatically update all of our scatters for us, which is awesome. Next is the X, which will remove everything. This button over here will allow us to add multiple items all together at the same time. And then next is the refresh button, and next to that the auto tick on or off. So if I select my object over here and I manipulate the surface, you'll see that the scattered objects are not updating. So what I need to do is I need to go inside Forest Pack and click this button, which is the refresh, and as I do that it automatically updates and refreshes the scatter, and then everything works nicely. If you want to avoid using this method where you have to constantly come in here and update it, you can simply click the auto button. Now every time I make a change, you'll see that it automatically updates for us, which is awesome. Now there is one little trick that we need to understand when we are adding surfaces. As I just mentioned over here, I'm going to add all these surfaces together, and it obviously auto updates everything. What is important to know, if we just decrease this a little bit just so we can see some scattered objects there. If I come inside here, and actually let's make sure that we keep the auto function on, so underneath surfaces, auto's on, which is great, because now if I come inside here and move this object over here, notice how it is automatically updating, which is great. I want you to have a look at the scattered objects that are appearing underneath this plane. So right now we got scattered objects there, and we got scattered objects underneath this plane, which makes sense. They all have their own scattered surface. If I come inside here, and I'm actually going to attach all of these planes as one object. Now you'll notice immediately that a whole bunch of scattered objects disappeared here as well as over there. And that is because the way scattered forest pack items work when you are attaching everything as one item is that the highest polygon gets the actual scattered objects. So have a look here. If I come inside over here and I move this plane over here, the one that's highlighted red, will get scattered objects. So right there, as I move it, you can see that all the scattered objects now appear, almost like you're covering it with an umbrella. So have a look again. So remember, when you're working with multiple surfaces that you want to scatter, and you are attaching them as one item, just remember that the highest polygon is the one that will actually get the scattered items. So if you in a situation like this, it is better to have them as individual items or individual surfaces if you want all of them to actually get scatters. Let's go back into our forest pack. Next is the get from forest, which we will discuss very last in this lesson. Next we have mode, XY and UV. Now in XY mode, you must understand that the scattering object is going to be scattered in the Z axis. So XY is working perfectly if it is a terrain that does not have a lot of steep inclines or declines, because anything past 90 degrees, it is not going to scatter on that object. So for example, let's go into this object over here. I'm going to select the sphere, forest pack, populate from selection just to speed the process up, click say yes, and the same concept and the same process. Let's go underneath distribution, increase that. What I am going to do is underneath display, I'm actually going to change it up. I'm going to go underneath display and change it to a proxy, and I'm actually going to choose a plant. So it looks pretty cool now. Let's make sure that inside this scatter, we are going to into the surface rollout and make sure that auto is on. So we discussed with auto, no matter what manipulations I do to the scattered surface, it will obviously auto update, which is really awesome. Now we just discussed that in this mode, XY, anything past 90 degrees, it will not scatter on. So imagine it's actually falling off the cliff. So if I lower this, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. But if I go straight down, nothing is scattering there. I can slowly increase it, and you can slowly see that the items are being scattered, but anything past 90 degrees, it's not going to scatter anymore. Before we dive into the next mode, I'd like to come back into the original example that we had. Let's go into this forest pack, and what I've done is I've split all of these surfaces up again into individual items. Let's go into our forest pack right over there, and let's go underneath the geometry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another item, custom, and add the sphere there. Again, same concept. We can go underneath the distribution tab, and let's just increase that to see some scatters. So underneath the surface rollout, we have another option over here that is called randomize stacked. This is helpful when we're adding multiple surfaces right over here. So let's delete all these guys. If we add multiple surfaces over here, what's going to happen is there is going to be a bit of repetition here. And that is because it's a surface, we are using the same two items. And the stack of the two objects that we're using will repeat. We can allocate a randomization to it. So if we click on randomize stack, what's happening is, if I switch it on and off, you can see that all of the surfaces are randomizing between one another, so there will not be any repeated patterns. So that's really, really useful. Next we have UV transform, which is all grayed out because that fits with the UV mode. Now the UV mode is perfect for steep inclines or geometry that has greater than 90-degree angles, and this is perfect because the UV mode allows us to actually scatter on an entire object. So let's dive into the example of here. I'm going to click on the sphere, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the forest pack. Let's go into the generate mode. Let's click modify panel, and for this example I'm actually going to choose the grass. Now you can see immediately it has not scattered everywhere because we just learned that if anything is past 90 degrees it will not scatter. In the event that you do want objects to scatter through the whole surface, we need to change it to UV mode. So what I'm going to do just for now is I'm going to add this object over here, and as I do that, the same thing has happened. It is only scattering on top there and on top there because everywhere else is greater than 90 degrees. If we change to UV mode, you'll see a couple of things have happened. Let's have a look at the sphere. The entire sphere is covered, which is awesome. The object that I have over here, it did work to a certain point. It worked all the way there and even over here, but it didn't scatter everywhere. And that is because what we need to do is on this object over here, if I select it, modify list, let's go to UVW mapping modifier and then change it to box. Now, if nothing has happened after you've done this, make sure you go into the actual forest pack item, and remember, we need to update. So let's keep it at auto. And as I do that, the entire object has been updated, and now everything is covered on all of the surfaces, which is really, really awesome. Randomize stack is the exact same as the XY mode. When you have multiple objects, you want a bit of randomization, make sure that you tick on that. UV transform. So what I'm going to do just for this example, I'm going to go underneath the display, and I'm going to change this to proxy, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change again to plant. There's a couple of things that we need to pay attention to. Number one is have a look at the angle that everything is scattering on. So everything is scattering basically straight up, which is not exactly what we want when we are dealing with full 3D geometry. As you can see there, it's just not looking right. So there's a couple of things that we can do here. First, let's discuss the UV transform. If I activate the align function, you'll see immediately over there some things are busy adjusting and changing. So now the UV transform align, you can use these parameters to modify the alignment and the scale of the items according to the UV coordinate. So the align, you can activate the U's and the V's, and then this is going to control the scale and the alignment according to the UVW mapping modifier. Next we have direction. So this is a lot easier to use. If you want objects to change the direction of where they are scattering from, this is what you need to do. Because remember, it is scattering from the actual polygon or the surface's normal. Now, if I keep it at 100, it is going straight up. If I put this at, let's say, 0, which is going to fall under normal, have a look at the direction everything is now scattering from, which is really awesome because now it's scattering in the actual direction of the object's normal. So if you look at the sphere, it looks perfect that way. And then if we change this all the way to negative values, you can start seeing that it's shifting all the way down, and then these ones break a bit because they're going actually inverted. So it's not what you want. I do have another example over here that I'd like to show you. Let's go into front view. So I've already attached all the items together. Got a little bit of a wavy terrain over here. So this is how it usually is. It's at 100. If I drag it down, you can start seeing the direction of the normal. So remember, these polygons are facing that way. And this is really useful because you can start controlling, especially when you've got vegetation, going up and down, incline and hills, just like this. The next option, scale to fit sloped areas. If we just zoom out and go back to one of the original examples that we discussed. Now, the option over here, if we just reattach everything, so let's select here, say yes, and just increase the distribution over here. Now, when we start fiddling with the direction we just discussed, we can control how it's actually behaving according to the surface normal. If we choose scale to fit sloped areas, a couple of things happen. Number one is, as I click on it, you can see it immediately went to 0, and this is actually locked now, because what's happening is it is looking automatically at the slope that you have created, and it will automatically adjust it. And at the same time, depending on the slope, so really important as always, let's just make sure that we have the auto function ticked, so whenever we make a manipulation, it will update. Now, as I scale this up, you can start seeing that yes, we are getting more and more scatters, but have a look at the actual size of it. So what's happening is, if you look again, it is adjusting the scale to fit the sloped area. So depending on the actual slope, it's actually going to manipulate the actual size. So if we have a look there, the further down I get, the scale is changing according to how steep it is. Next we have the altitude range, so let's unhide all and let's go to this example right over there. Front view, and again, very, very simple. If we can imagine the green is terrain and the blue is going to act as water, and we don't want our scatter trees to run into the water. So what we can do is we can use the altitude range, which is really, really awesome. First thing to note, if I increase or decrease these values, nothing is going to happen, and that is because we must make sure that we activate it by clicking on limited. Now by doing that, we can now play with these values. So for example, the bottom value, if I just slowly start adjusting these values until I start seeing an effect, you'll start noticing that the trees right over there are only starting wherever I choose them to. So remember, it's working in whatever unit scale you're working, whether it's feet or the metric system. So now I can actually control and say to the forest pack, I don't want you to generate any trees from a certain altitude. In my case, it's 378. And the same concept can work with the top, meaning if you're working in very high terrains, then you don't want the trees to be at the very, very top. You can actually start controlling it that it only goes up to a certain altitude in your actual terrain, just like that. So really handy and really, really useful to actually use these features. The density fall off and the scale fall off work really, really well as well. This is going to allow you to control the density at a certain altitude as well as the scale. So what we can do is go into the perspective mode. And what we can do is, for example, the scale. Now, what we are doing essentially is saying that all the trees close to the water can be really small, and then they gradually get bigger like that. If we click on edit, we obviously can manipulate this with the actual graph here. So if I drag this all the way down, you'll notice that it's reversed. We've got tiny trees at the top and a lot bigger ones at the bottom, which again can be really, really useful. Same concept will apply with the density fall off. So I click on edit over here. I can actually say that I want the density to be less at the top and really, really thick at the actual bottom. Again, a lot of control you can do over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to untick this, untick that, and go back to the standard. Next we have slope range. Again, make sure that you click on limited to activate it. Now what we can do here is control the actual scattering items by the terrain's degree. So for example, if I just slowly increase this, let's say to a good 15 degrees, what we're saying now is that anything that is 15 degrees max, so 0 to 15 degrees, should get a scatter. Anything that falls outside those parameters will not get a scatter. So if I to choose something like a 90 degree and let's say a 45 degree, now we are telling Max and Forest Pack that anything between 45 degrees and max 90 degrees must get a scatter. Again, really useful when you're working with very large terrains. Same concept here, the density fall off and the scale fall off with these two graphs over here will control the density and the scaling, meaning if things are going to be bigger and smaller, and you can control that. Okay, we do have the non-image mode linked to surface. We are actually going to discuss this in a much later lesson. For now, let's dive all the way to the top and we can discuss the get from forest, which is a very new feature from Forest Pack 8 onwards. So let's go into the top view and you can see already I've got a couple of forest packs set up. Now the idea is as follows. We are going to have one parent or master forest pack, and then all the others are going to be the children where they will attach to the parent. The idea is as follows. If you have a surface and you want to attach, in this instance, 4 forest packs, we would have to select each forest pack, go into the surface, click the plus button and select that terrain. Now what we can do from Forest Pack 8 onwards is have one master which will have all of the surfaces that we want, and then link all of the other Forest Pack items and act as children and link them to the parent. So whatever the parent node has in terms of its surface, it will adapt to all of the Forest Packs. And that's great because every single child Forest Pack will have its own settings and parameters that we can obviously control. So this is how it's going to work. To speed up the process, what I've done is I've already attached all the geometry. So in the master node, I've got trees, I've got bushes, I've got rocks, and I've got grass. Now the parent node needs to have the surface. So let's click the plus sign and click on the parent node, and immediately you can see we've got the scatters of the trees. What I'm now going to do is underneath bushes, I'm not going to add the surface. I'm going to say get from forest. Now this is where it's useful to label things. So get from forest, Scene Explorer, this one, master, and as I click on it, immediately you can see that we got new scatters on that item. Let's go underneath the rocks, same concept, the control panel, get from forest, back to Scene Explorer and choose the master one. You can see it already populated, and then finally the grass, same concept, get from forest, Scene Explorer, master. Now it's awesome because now if I want to change anything, all I need to do is just obviously go into the children forest packs and I can change and manipulate those. And then if I want to add an additional surface, so for example, if I grab another plane right over there, I can go into the master node, and this is where the power comes in, because as soon as I add another plane over here, you'll notice that it gets all of the children as well, which is really, really handy. So what I've done is I've created a little bit of an ecosystem myself right over here. If I go into the camera mode, you can see what I've done. I've actually created and I've manipulated and used all of the settings that I've already gone through in these lessons to control exactly what we see. If we go into perspective mode, let's have a look. I've got a whole bunch of trees and I've controlled the trees to not go into the water. I've got rocks that will come from the shoreline all the way through. I've got some bushes and I've got some grass, and I've basically controlled all the altitudes, making sure that it fits what I want. So in this instance, I am using the Corona rendering engine, and if we go into a quick render, I'll be able to show you what it actually looks like. Now of course I have not paid attention to anything in terms of the textures of the water or the terrain. This is simply just to show you how the get from forest can actually work. And as you can see, as it's rendering, what we've got is all of the stones will obviously stop. They go through the water via. So if I just grab the plane that I created and hide that, you'll see that it covers all the way through. And this is where it's really, really handy, because now if I want this ecosystem to appear on another terrain, it's really, really simple. All I would need to do is select the master, which happens to be the trees. And if I go into perspective mode, I've got another terrain right over here. If I click the plus button, again, just as I explained in the previous one, you can see that it's adapted all of the parameters as well as the actual scattered items. So really great way to create your very own ecosystem.